ألا من كنت مولاه فهذا علي مولاه. اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه.
Is Abdul Rashid Ali Muhammad Al-Ameriki, and I'm 37 years old. Was born in Toronto, Ontario. I've got my family. First of all, my parents are from Jamaica. My mother is a white Jamaican, and my father is a black Jamaican. So I came out as a gray Jamaican, or I guess a brown Jamaican. And my true father, he passed before I was born. So I was raised by my mom, a single parent, and it created a pretty interesting situation where you see a little brown kid with an afro walking with a white lady. And next thing you know, you hear a Jamaican accent coming out of this white lady's mouth. They used to get a few interesting situations. People were shocked, like, what's going on here? But my mom got remarried when I believe I was 9 years old, and my mom and my stepdad had another 4 children. So I've got 1 brother and 3 sisters from my mother and my stepdad, and they're all blonde and blue-eyed. So I kind of stick out like a sore thumb. Yeah, we're close. We're close. We could have been closer, but it's a really interesting dynamic. Some racial issues within the family. So I was kind of shunned away from my brothers and sisters at a young age. But at an older age, we've sparked up a really good relationship between all of us. Being raised in a Jamaican household, I was raised Christian, Pentecostal Christian, and with a heavy Rastafarian influence. But my mom and my stepdad, they put me into a Christian school for elementary school from grade 2 or grade 3 all the way up to grade 8. So I went to People's Christian School, which is a school in Toronto, affiliated with the People's Christian Church. And going through elementary school in a Christian school, which was a private school, wearing uniform and having Bible class every day, that really molded me to be God conscious, because we'd always have Bible class every day. And it led also to me ending up having some problems, because when someone like me, who I found that as a child I was always challenging things, because being raised by a single mother, most guys, they have a father to show them the ropes. Me, it was all trial and error. It was all finding out things for myself, not depending on anybody to show me anything. So I was kind of an in-your-face type of kid that was mainly misunderstood, which then made me misunderstand a lot of things. Like, why do people react to me like this when I'm just trying to figure things out, So I used to get into a lot of problems in Bible class specifically, because when you're reading the Bible every day, you become pretty well acquainted with it. It's not like some foreign idea that you're not too comfortable with and you don't know to speak on it, or what to ask, or what to say, or what angle to take it. It's something that we were all very familiar with. So in situations where we'd be reading the same book and the teacher is giving me an interpretation of it, and I'm not seeing that interpretation, I would definitely make that known and be like, for instance, why are you telling me to worship this man who's telling me to worship God? So as a child, I got this outlook on life and people in society, that most of the people that I know, and most of the people that are in positions of authority, and most of the people that are supposed to be there for guidance, they need guidance themselves. And it's kind of like, I remember when I was about 7 years old, I was sitting in church one day and watching all the nonsense going around me, and I reasoned to myself that the majority of the people and the adults that I know are weird. Therefore, if they consider me to be normal, then that means I'm pretty weird too. So therefore, in order to be not weird, I will have to be considered weird and strange by these people. And that would be a good sign. So I started to understand in my head why people react to me the way they do. And my solace was this idea I had in my head that, what, they're all messed up, so they better think I'm weird, And it kind of helped me deal with those issues, whereas otherwise, other kids that go through that type of situation, they get frustrated, they get down, they have a bad outlook on life, you know what I mean? So through school, my main interests were just about anything that I can learn from. You know, every class I was very attentive and very involved. Whether some teachers thought it was for the wrong reasons or not, that's their interpretation of it. But I was always looking for answers to why things are the way they are. You know, why does the society have the problems it has? Why do poor people exist when there's so much, you know, to be given? You know what I mean? So much available. So that was my childhood, a childhood of asking questions, and what some people with not so much insight would consider just rebellion. It was more looking at society and seeing it's got problems and not wanting to be a part of those problems or partake in them, and wanting to look for truth and reality, you know, so that things would, you know, be clear and settled with me. You know what I mean? Forget what anybody else thinks. I want to find out what truth is in all types of areas, whether it's religion or science or whatever the case, you know. I didn't go to university. Actually, it's quite a long story. After a few years living with my stepdad, we never really got along. I didn't like the way he treated my mother, and we used to get into fights. And one time when things came to a head, I was 13 years old, and I was defending my mom, and he kind of came at me, you know. And most of the times up until that point, I was the one that would cower because he's 30-something years old. I'm like 10 years old, you know what I mean? I never thought of fighting back. But for some reason at this point, I thought I should fight back, and I surprised myself. I think I surprised him too. But that made kind of a turning point in the house. Like there was a definite rift. And a few years later, he kicked me out on the street. So I was on the street for a few years. So that kind of messed up a lot of things in my life as far as university, as far as, you know, sports. I was hoping to go on a baseball scholarship. And that all got kind of thrown upside down, and, you know, you go away from thinking about your future as far as the things, your hopes and dreams, and start thinking about eating your next meal. You know what I mean? So that kind of changes your outlook. You know what I mean? You're not worried about education so much, you know. But in the same tone as the ideas I had as a child, I realized that I need to educate myself in all areas. You know, I'd finished high school. I was in the IB program, advanced, very high level. I was in a private school for elementary school. So when I finished grade 8, I was doing like grade 12 work. So high school was kind of boring and very easy for me. And at the same time, realizing the game that, you know, it's an institution run by the government, and their whole game is to make us into obedient workers, not critical thinkers, not independent entities, but a collective of dumbed down sheeple. So, this was so apparent to me everywhere I went in any institutional setting, whether it's university, high school, you know, and anything in general, you know, in the society that supports the system. So I realized, you know, my future education, the way I'd planned it, isn't going to go the way it's meant to go. But I realized that this may actually be a good thing, because I see people that come out of university, not all of them, but a lot of people that come out of university, they got textbook sense. But as far as real knowledge and wisdom and how to live in society and better themselves, they're clueless. So to me, it was an opportunity, if anything, to get what they will call an unorthodox education. And to me, it was a better education because it's without the blinders and the filters and the massaging of the minds that you get in an institutional setting. So I started studying, you know, the religion I was raised on, which is Pentecostal Christianity. And a lot of the questions that I had that I couldn't get answered in the church setting or in the private school setting, I started looking for the answers myself. And one example is, even when I was a child in church, I never felt right. Like I said earlier, we'd be reading the Bible in class, and the teacher would give an interpretation of what we're reading. I'd be like, "You're telling me to worship a man who's telling me to worship God. Make sense of that to me. Where does it say that he says I'm to worship him? Not only that, why didn't Moses in the Old Testament say to worship Jesus? Why didn't Abraham, why didn't any of these prophets say any of this? And God says in the Bible he's the same. He doesn't change. His plan is always the same. He doesn't throw us curveballs and say, okay, enough of that. I'm going to try this new thing. I'm going to come and be a man and learn how you guys live and all this type of stuff. It's like God knows all things. He knows how many hairs are on my head. Why would he have to come and live to be like me? Realizing that none of them are giving me any answers and they're just looking at me like I'm inside out and backwards. After, at this stage now, when most kids are going to university, I'm hitting the library, I'm reading books, you know, reading stuff on the history of Christianity. You know, it's formative years. Things like the Council of Nicaea, you know, the Arian so-called heresy that they called, which were the people who believed that Jesus was a prophet. They were Muslims, and they were suppressed and beaten and thrown out, and most of them were killed off. Same story of our imams, you know. So the more I studied, the more I started to realize I can't ignore a lot of these issues because they're not just going away. Some people want to follow a religion because it's a comfort zone for them. Forget comfort. I'd already lived a life that was pretty uncomfortable, so I wasn't looking for nothing comfortable. I'm looking for the real deal. If it's uncomfortable, then I got to do what I got to do to get comfortable with it. I'm not trying to make it comfortable for me. I'd come to that realization, you know what I mean? So I started studying and studying. I read a lot of books and realized that, you know, Christianity as it is today is a fraud. And I can't live a fraud. Not knowing what the truth was, I left Christianity. And I stopped practicing it, but I didn't let go of my belief in God or in Jesus, but Jesus as a messenger, as a great teacher, not a man, not a God. Having no idea that there was a whole religion that said that. So basically, now looking back, I was a Muslim before I even knew what a Muslim was. You know what I mean? So as I studied, you know, I realized, okay, I've left Christianity now, and I felt very, very vulnerable, very, you know, if you want to say naked, for lack of a better term. I felt exposed. I felt like I was alone in the wilderness. You know, it was kind of an anxious time in my life. So I reasoned with myself, you know, Christianity is basically, as it is basically a form of unorthodox Judaism. So I reasoned, go back to the source. So I studied Judaism for a few years. And I found many of the same problems with Christianity that are in Christianity are in Judaism. You know, they've massaged a lot of the stuff. There's a lot of bias in there. There's a lot of stuff that makes no sense. A lot of contradictions that can't be answered by their leaders. So after I studied Judaism for a few years, I left that and I started studying just about everything to do with religion and politics there is, reading every book I can. Studied Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, the occult, Freemasonry, Illuminati, like native myths and all that kind of stuff. And every time I'd look at one, I'd end up coming to the same conclusions. You know, there's some truth in here, but this isn't the right path. You know what I mean? And every time I'd look at one, I'd end up coming to the same conclusions. You know, there's some truth in here, but this isn't the right path. You know what I mean? So I came to a time where I just basically said, you know, God, I'm looking for the truth. Help me. You know what I mean? I don't know where to go. You have to help me, because I know from my Christian days, we're told that, you know, you come towards God, he comes towards you. You reach out to him, he reaches out to you. Seek first the kingdom of God and everything will be added onto you. So I'm like, God, I'm looking for the truth. I got no other recourse here. I'm being sincere to you. And I was walking through a bookstore one day with a friend of mine, and I'm walking through this aisle and something told me, turn left. And I looked and there's this book on the bookshelf that was just calling to me. A lot of people might think, okay, this is probably the Quran he's talking about or some Islamic book. No, it was a book on Freemasonry. It was I can't remember what it's called, something in the Holy Grail by, I can't remember it, Robert Knight and Richard Lomas or something. They're Freemasons. It's basically talking about the tenets of Freemasonry and how it started and breaking down the myths of Freemasonry, which I was very interested in because I had known by then that, you know, the United States is the biggest terrorist on the planet, and they practice state-sponsored terrorism for the ends of their own interests. And this is nothing new. This is what the Romans did. This is what Hitler did. This is what all empires do. You know, they create terrorism, create enemies, and all sorts of stuff. So, and I knew that the Masons and the Illuminati had a lot to do with it. So my thinking was, if I can't find the truth, I might as well learn about my enemy. You know, keep your enemies close. You learn about those on the other side, you know what I mean? Because they're your enemies. You got to know what they're up to, you know? And in this book, it got into a part where it talked about how the Masons accept all people of all religions. And it talked about how, you know, there's no problem in Masonry if you believe that Jesus is God or if you believe that he's just a prophet like the Muslims. I'm like, hold on a second, the Muslims believe in Jesus? So this is my first introduction to the idea that there are people out there that believe the way I did. So I started talking to some Muslim friends of mine. I used to, you know some Palestinian friends up in where I was living. And it wasn't really a heavy conversation, but, you know, basic, you know, question answer stuff in passing while we're doing our usual stupidness that we do when we're teenage guys or in our early 20s. And along this, I mean, I talk about stupid stuff. I was into a lot of stupid stuff back then. And believe it or not, on the day of September 11th, I was actually in court because I was a bad guy who got caught, and I was, you know, waiting for a trial. And I'm not afraid to mention this. The truth is the truth. But it was the morning of September 11th, and the judge was supposed to be out at 9 in the morning. And it was about 10 o'clock, and nobody could find a judge. 11 o'clock comes, nobody can find a judge. People are on their cell phones talking, you know, a train hit the Pentagon, or, you know, it's just started coming out. So there was conflicting stories. But there's a buzz in the courthouse about, you know, some crazy event happened. Turns out the judge was in his chambers watching CNN. So he eventually comes out, the court is done, we finished court, I ended up getting off my charges, I was not guilty, and I was found not guilty, alhamdulillah. And my friends were holding a party for me because of this. So we went to the party, and one of my friends' name was Eid, Palestinian guy. And we're talking, basically, we always used to talk about conspiracies and politics and religion and history, and I'm talking to him, we're like, you know, Eid, dude, what's up with you Muslims and this, you know, killing innocent people? Like, I gotta give you guys credit. You're the only organization or only group that's fighting against the New World Order and what the US and all these clowns are up to. But couldn't you guys do a better job of being a little bit more strategic and not taking out so much innocent people? And I remember it's like it was yesterday. He got mad at me because we're friends. We yell at each other all the time. But he got extra mad at me. He's like, bro, what are you talking about? Do you know nothing about Islam? He says Muslims don't kill innocent people. You know, you'll be shocked to know who's behind that. And you should know better, knowing what you know about the US. And so things started to make sense right there, started to come together for me that, you know what, I know better than to jump to conclusions that these Muslims did this. And the more he's talking, he's like, you look surprised. And I said, yeah, well, you know, you gave me something to think about. He's like, well, you'll be surprised at how the Christians will be surprised when Jesus comes back. And he starts telling them what's really up. And he's with the Muslims. I looked at him, I said, yo, Eid, what do you know about Jesus, man? I was raised a Muslim. I was raised a Christian. You want to know about Jesus? Come talk to me. Eid flipped out. He said, don't you know that Jesus is a prophet of Allah? That all Muslims believe in Jesus? I thought he was playing with me. I thought he was joking around. I thought he was just pulling my leg. I'm like, get out of here, man. Don't play with me, man. You know what I mean? It's not a joke. He's like, no, I'm not joking, man. Every Muslim believes in Jesus and the real Jesus. I says, okay, well, you tell me what you Muslims believe about Jesus. I'm like, humor. I'm thinking, it's a joke still. He proceeds to explain Jesus in a way that I had already believed in him. So imagine me here all these years looking for answers and having this idea of Jesus and thinking I'm all alone, and then finding out that there's a whole group of over like 2 billion people who believe the same thing I believe. So I said to him, I said, Eid, if you're joking, I'm going to knock you out, man. But if you're serious, then I got to get myself a Quran. I started reading that. So he said, no, I'm dead serious, man. I said, yes, you go do that. So the very next day, I went to my Palestinian friend, Jamal, and I said, yo, Jamal. So I was driving taxi in Newmarket at the time, and we met at the GO station. I called him up. I'm like, Jamal, meet me at the GO station. So he meets me at the GO station. He thinks something's up, you know, one of my usual crazy things that I'm up to, you know. But he was surprised to hear me say, yo, Jamal, you got to do me a favor, man. I need you to get me a Quran. He says, what are you going to do with it? Like he thought I was going to disrespect it or something like that. I said, bro, I want to read it, man. He's like, you serious? I'm like, yeah, man, I want to read your book, see what you're about. I study this about everything else, man. You know me. We always get down. We always talk about these type of things. You know what I mean? And he's like, okay. So the very next day, he brought me a Quran. I took that home and I read Surah Fatiha. I remember it like yesterday. tears coming to my eyes and feeling like you know when you've been out on a long vacation and you're really homesick, and then you finally get home and you open up your door and you're home, you're like, oh, I'm home. That's how I felt, you know. I kept reading that Quran until I finished it in like a week or two, and then I called Jamal the next day and I'm like, yo, dude, you Muslims, you go to something called a mosque, don't you? He's like, yeah. It's like, where is it? He's like, why? Thinking I'm up to something again. I'm like, bro, I want to go and check it out. He's like, you serious? I'm like, yeah, I'm dead serious. So the next Friday we went to, he took me to the mosque, and I took Shahada right there. And it was Al Sunnah school, you know. And so I started learning from them a lot, and learning my prayers, starting to memorize surahs. And I thought I was home. I thought that was the end of my journey. I thought I'd come to, you know, the promised land. And I had this naive outlook, thinking that, oh, you know, now that I'm here and now that I'm on the truth, everybody else that's on the truth is going to be an angel, and all the nonsense I had to put up with in Christianity, the hypocrisy and the backbiting and all that kind of stuff is going to be done, you know. Little did I know, you know what I mean? But at least I had enough sense, or Allah guided me enough to realize that, you know, if there's a problem, it's not with Islam, it's with Muslims. And the next phase of my journey started when brothers at the mosque started thinking, you know, okay, he's starting to learn, he obviously wants to learn a lot, so they thought they needed to protect me. So the typical, stay away from the Shia. Don't read the Shia books. You know, these Shias are crazy, they worship Ali, they say that there's a different Quran and all this type of stuff. They're trying to scare the naive guy from going and looking around at stuff. So my mentality is, I came here by questioning everything, by doing my research. Why would anybody think I'm gonna stop now? So when they told me don't read the Shia books, as soon as I left, I'm looking for Shia books. You know what I mean? I started reading everything, Shia, Sufi, Sunni, Alawi, everything, Baha'i, you know, all of the stuff. And just looking at it for what it is, you know what I mean? And that lasted for a couple of years until I came across the book. Then I was guided. And that just put it all together for me. Like, all the stuff in there was I'd already come across it, but the way that brother put it together was just, it was perfect. And so I found out where a Shia mosque was, Bayview Mosque. And I went there the next Friday, and that was it. I found myself a home, you know, and growing in the path of the Ala al-Bayt alayhim salam from then. I can't really say I faced any difficulties, because I mean, people that know me know I don't get offended easily, and I don't really care what anybody thinks. You know what I mean? As long as I know I'm doing what's right, I could care less, honestly. I mean, it even, I have to admit it, sometimes it borders on arrogance and may come across as that, but I like to think of it as certitude, you know? If I'm doing what's right, there's gonna be haters and dejectors. Every prophet went through that. Every single prophet that came, he was on the right, and he was told to speak boldly. He wasn't told to cower away. He wasn't told to be oppressive or aggressive, but the truth never is supposed to back down. 1 + 1 = 2 stands tall on the mountaintop, saying, all challenges come. It doesn't hide, and it doesn't cower and say, yeah, I'm 2. It says, yeah, 1 + 1 is 2, take it or leave it. You know what I mean? It is what it is. So, I mean, people would comment, people would say this and that. I changed my name to Rashid. People will come with all sorts of different names and stuff like that, but it didn't bother me. It's like, you know what? I feel sorry for you guys. You know what I mean? I feel sorry for y'all. And the more you ridicule me and diss me, the bigger my reward will be. You know what I mean? Allah gave me some broad shoulders. You know what I mean? Alhamdulillah. I'm not, the childhood I went through and the troubles I went through, basically, I mean, the moral of my story is everything happens for a reason. Everything I went through was like, earlier was like steel going through the fire and getting slammed and hammered so it could hold up a tall building. You know what I mean? So when people were dissing and making fun, who cares? You know, what are you guys doing? You know what I mean? My family, they didn't exactly accept. I kind of kept it away from, I didn't really hide it, but I didn't bring it to the forefront. My mother is a very emotional Jamaican woman, and she's very controlling, and you know, if if I had just come out and told her, she would have probably beat me over the head with a Bible and tied me down to the couch and hit me with Bible verses. Like it was the Christmas about a year after I had embraced Islam, and we were there for Christmas dinner, and the ham and the pork chops and all that stuff is there, and I'm refusing. So at first eyebrows are coming up and like, what's up with that? You know what I mean? But nothing's mentioned. Then the wine time is like, nah, it's okay. What's up with that? You know. Then my mom happened to make a comment about the mark on my forehead. What's that from? Being a man who's not gonna lie, but I wasn't bringing it to the forefront. That was a time where I was caught, so I couldn't lie. I said, that's from praying, Mom. Praying? I said, yeah, Mom, that's from praying. She looked at me and she said, have you gone with the Muslims? I said, Mom, I'm still here. We haven't gone anywhere. But yes, I'm a Muslim now. She didn't like it too much. Like the whole family kind of was in shock, and you know, my mom was in denial. She kept on sending me Bible stuff and Christian stuff, and I'd take it because I didn't want to say no to her, you know. But just recently, about a year ago, and this is after about 14 years of being a Muslim, they had moved out to where my stepdad's from, which is Alberta, and they've been out there for about 8 years. My sister got married, so I went out there and saw my mom for the first time in about 10 years. And actually, for the first time, got to sit down with them, and they were actually receptive and listening to what I was saying when I was explaining certain things about Islam that they had no idea of. And when I was trying to show them before, they were not going to hear it. Certain things like, you know, 9/11 came up, and I explained to them that, you know, Islam does not allow that. Islam does not allow people to be killed innocently. In fact, Islam has the most strict code of ethics when it comes to war. You can't even chop down trees. You can't harm the animal in the field. You can't harm a woman. You can't harm the monk. You can't harm the man working in the field. You're only supposed to attack people that are coming to attack you. And so the whole concept of Islam is pristine, but Muslims are the issue. And making the connection to it's the same thing in Christianity. Same thing in all walks of life. You know, the one thing about Islam is perfect. The Muslims make the mistakes, but even in Christianity or Buddhism or other religions, you know what I mean, it's not the Buddhists or the Christians, you know, it's not Buddhism or Christianity that's the problem. You know what I mean? Even though it's been flawed, it still has that golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So line that up with how the Christians are behaving, and you're left with only one conclusion: the Christians need to clean up their act, or the Muslims need to clean up their act. But Islam itself, pristine. And I got that across to them this very recently when I was there, to the point where, you know, even my stepdad was like, wow, I'm very happy to hear this. Because they had this idea that I was some Osama bin Laden follower. And I'm like, well, how come you haven't heard of me blowing anything up yet? You know what I mean? Like the truth is right there in front of you to see if you only take the time to look at it and think about it. You know, critically examine things. This is how you get the truth. Scientific method. You know, there's no pin the tail on the truth. You know what I mean? There's no blindfold, you know, pick that, okay, Islam, okay, I'm gonna be a Muslim. No, it doesn't work like that. In every aspect of life, you must critically think. The first thing Allah created was the intellect. Why? It says that understanding and comprehending is better than 1,000 worshipers. You understand? People can blindly go through rituals. It means nothing to them. You know, someone's born a Muslim, but they don't understand Islam. What good is that over someone who's born an atheist? You understand? They might be lucky that they're on the guidance, but if it doesn't get into their heart, we know what that means. You know, so critical thinking comes in all aspects of searching for truth and justice. And it seems like I finally got that through to my family, where, you know, we were raised in a Pentecostal environment where, believe it or not, I was told that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the Antichrist, astaghfirullah, and that the Quran was written by the devil and all this type of stuff. You know what I mean? So that was bred into us. It was one of the reasons why when I studied all these religions, I never studied Islam. I never even considered it, because I was told and brainwashed that it was some evil path. You know what I mean? And so that's the same thing my parents had to deal with. You know, they hear that I converted to Islam, right away all this crazy stuff comes into their head. You know, and I'm converted to Islam. I give my mom little handouts on Jesus, and she's like, I don't need your Jesus. I have my Jesus. You know what I mean? Like my Jesus has horns and a tail or something like that. You know what I mean? So it was good to have that breakthrough where now they realize that Islam is not like a satanic religion or something. It's the same God. You know, explain to them that, you know, in Arabic, God's name is Allah. In Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke, it's Allah. So if you're going to be a Christian, one who follows Jesus, then you better follow Jesus. In other words, he calls it Allah. If you're going to follow him, then you're going to call God Allah as well. And you're Christians. You should have no problem with calling God or recognizing Allah as God. You know, who you call God the Father is who I call Allah. And who the Jews in Hebrew, I believe it's Allah, or Elohim, which is the, you know, the angels, the host of God. So it's all in there. Ishmael, El means God. God hears, you know, the El, the Allah. Making these connections because they've been brainwashed into believing these things about Islam. And we know who controls the media here. And they don't like us too much. So naturally we're being portrayed as something that we're not. You know, so alhamdulillah, I got to engage them and get on that intellectual level with them and kind of open their eyes a little bit. I ended up doing a few things. Like I went to broadcasting school. I'm a certified broadcaster, but going back in the day, I mean, I was working with local TV here, doing a TV show on local sports and entertainment as an intern straight out of the training. You know, volunteer internship. About a year into my internship, that station closed down and all of the stations associated with that station closed down and were amalgamated into one station. So all of us interns got let go and it was about, okay, I gotta find something to do, you know what I mean? So I started, you know, construction and then construction tax, anything I could do anything halal that I could do to earn a living. You know, there's many other more lucrative opportunities out there, but they weren't up to snuff, you know, morally or ethically as far as the new me was concerned. So just like, you know, all the prophets, most of them worked with their hands. Isa alayhi salam was a carpenter, you know what I mean? The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam insisted on building his masjid with his own hands and nobody could stop him, even though they insisted that, you know, you're the prophet of Allah, what are you doing? You know, making the example that all the most righteous men that came on the earth worked with their hands. You know, they weren't sitting behind a computer scheming people out of their RRSPs or stockbrokers and all that type of stuff. You know, things that I didn't want anything to do with and that I myself don't feel are ethical and moral work. Now I'm into security and social work. I work with, I'm a head of security at a health center that deals with a lot of, is in the inner city, that deals with a lot of underprivileged, underhoused, homeless, you know, people with addictions, and it's about the whole gamut of what is considered the dark side of life. You know, what most people try to avoid and think is, you know, if you want to say the downtrodden, you know. The shelter I work with, Mosaic Interfaith, out of the Cold of York region, is very well known now, very well respected because of how successful we've been in that field. You know, we're probably the most popular shelter program in the GTA because most of the people feel they're respected with us. They get treated well as opposed to some of the mainstream shelters where people are just treated like a number and as a nuisance. You know what I mean? We actually treat them and engage them as family. You know what I mean? And it reminds me of, you know, Isa alayhi salam in the Bible was chastised by some people because they say, you know, you only hang out with the poor and the lepers and the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the low end of the society. And he responded, he said, that's who I'm sent to. You know, basically, someone who's already taken a shower doesn't need to take a bath. You know what I mean? Same thing Ahmad al-Hassan alayhi salam says now. He says he's sent to those people who need to be reformed. You know, the people who support Imam Mahdi, there's some hadith that say that there will be no Arabs in his army. There are some hadith that say that most of the people in his army will be those who are considered outcasts by the mainstream. You know, you look at Nuh alayhi salam. He was chastised, saying the only people that follow you are the lowest and the roughest and the most rugged of society. And he responded and said, who am I supposed to turn them away if they believe in their Lord? You know, their answering is to their Lord. Who am I to turn the believers away? Lest my Lord chastise me. You know, that's my mentality nowadays. I don't care about money. I don't care about any of that stuff. Allah takes care of my needs. I can honestly say, like, I lived on the street for 2 years. I'm here. I had food in my belly. Allah takes care of those who do his work. You know what I mean? So anything I can do to help people less than me and do the work that, you know, the Ahlul Bayt, alayhi salam, do and did. I'm calling myself a Shia, a follower, so I must follow, you know. Just try to keep it simple, keep it halal, and try to be a benefit to the society I live in, you know. I'm not anything like I used to be. Like, people from my past wouldn't even recognize me. The kind of stuff I used to do, the way I carry myself. At the time of my life, I was not a nice person, not at all. You know, a lot of the stuff I went through kind of made me hard at times, and sometimes I felt like the world owed me stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I was a pretty bad person at sometimes, you know. Now it's like night and day. You know, I have, the most important thing is I'm at peace and I'm centered. You know what I mean? I feel that certitude that we hear the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam always talk about. I can say I have that, you know. Nothing really shakes me, nothing really moves me. I know everything happens for a purpose, and I know that we're all going towards a goal. As long as I play my role, I don't worry about nothing. And I'm a happier person. You know, I'm a lot more positive person for, you know, the society I'm in. I do a lot of good as opposed to doing a lot of bad. You know, I've always been someone who studies a lot, but instead of studying and looking for a needle in a haystack, I've got the needle. You know what I mean? And starting to realize that there's more to the needle than meets the eye. Different depths of knowledge and wisdom that come with the school of the Ahlul Bayt. It's fascinating. The more I study, the more I'm fascinated. The more things that are opened up to me, the more you know, deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, if you want to put it that way. You know, the more your eyes are opened up. I'd say with the mentality that I had, you know, as a child and going through the stuff I went through, and being, if you want to say, fearless, you know, I'm a type of person that likes to bring things to the forefront that I feel are important that may be overlooked by other people. So there's a lot. Some people might see me as a troublemaker. Some people see me as someone who's just saying what needs to be said. I put out a lot of, you know, written stuff that I send emails out. I send out a lot of public service announcements based on current events and Islamic issues, things that aren't being covered in the Friday khutbahs. You know, things that are very important in this day and age, different signs of the times. You know, I study a lot of hadith, and I find that a lot of Muslims, a lot of Shias especially, they don't study their hadith. So we're not up to date on what's really going on right now. For instance, many hadith about the reappearance of the Imam alayhi salam, about the signs leading up to that. They're happening right now. You know, there's one issue I try to bring to the forefront is these end times of what we're told. You know, one major aspect is there's a reality of 12 Imams. There's also a reality of 12 Mahdis after the 12 Imams, who are supposed to rule under the kingdom of God on earth, as the Bible attests to and the Quran attests to. When Islam comes and spreads all over the whole earth and everybody realizes the true rank of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family, and justice will be spread throughout the whole earth. And there's evidence of this in the Bible, evidence in the Quran, and so many authentic hadiths, but I find that I've never heard a single Jummah khutbah about this. I've never heard a majlis about this. So when I come across things like that, that's just one example. I put it out there to everybody. And people will deject and say, you're crazy, what are you talking about, where you get this from, I never heard of that. And then I respond and say, well, you know, there was a time when I never even heard about Islam. So just because you didn't hear of something doesn't mean it's not true. So I try to get people to do their homework. You know, the same way I came to truth by doing homework, I see a lot of people not doing homework. They blindly follow. I want to get people's minds working so that they're aware of what's going on and not just sitting back. You know, they're not Sunday couch potato Muslims. They're out there being active. You know what I mean? And looking into doing their research and knowing their religion and not just jumping on a bandwagon because it's what their family or their forefathers did or a tradition, because I'm living proof of that. I was raised on something, and I could have easily said, you know what, this is the truth. Why should I look at anything else? I never heard of that. I never heard of that. But instead, you know, you inquire, you take everything that comes in front of you and you evaluate it on its merits, and you find the truth, and you go with that. You know, truth doesn't just fall out of the sky and hit you in the head. You know what I mean? You have to look for it. Everything worth having, you have to work for. Man is entitled only to that for which he strives. So if you want truth and you're not striving for it, good luck.